Hello everyone and welcome to another Fusion 360 Tech Tuesday. My name is Brad Tallis, I'm from Autodesk, and today's topic we're going to be talking about copying and pasting parts and components. I'm actually going to create this cutting board. I'm going to show you how I went about designing it inside of Fusion and some of the issues that I ran into with like copying and cutting parts. So I'm going to share those tips and tricks with you. Okay, so here is the finished design, and I don't think I'm going to be able to go through the whole thing today. I just want to show you how you could go about designing something like this. And you'll notice that there's some repetitive pieces in here, and this is kind of what I wanted to share with you, is how would you go about creating this? So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm in inches, so I'm going to confirm that my units are in inches. And I'm just going to go ahead and create a new component. So because this is going to consist of multiple parts, I want to design using components. So I'm going to say new component. I'm just going to call this block. Create a quick sketch, and I like to do the top view since we're going to be looking down on the block. So I'm just going to draw a rectangle. And I know that these are supposed to be 1.5 inches square. So I'm just going to type in 1.5 and then stop my sketch. Now, in a previous live stream that I did, I talked a lot about parameters and how they can really speed up your design. And so I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to create a parameter called thickness because maybe I want to try different thickness cutting boards. Maybe one's going to be a cutting board, maybe one's going to be like a cheese board or something like that. And instead of having to go in and edit a whole bunch of extrudes, I could go in and edit a parameter. So we're going to come in and say, change parameters. And I'm going to create a user parameter. And in this case, I'll call it thickness. And I'm going to go minus 0.75 inches. Okay, so what this allows me to do is now I can click on this guy, say extrude, and I just start typing in thickness, and you'll see how it recognizes that parameter. So I'm going to click on that, and you can see that it extrudes in the minus 0.75. I'll say OK, and here's my component. Now I want to basically copy or mirror this multiple times. So I'm just going to come up here and say create a mirror. And I want to mirror this body along, for example, let's just say this plane right here. And you'll now see that I have under my component called block, I've got two bodies right here. Okay. Then I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to say mirror. I'll select both of these guys, and let's just mirror along that plane. And very quickly, I now have 4 blocks that are the correct size. Now, one of the things I like to do is to kind of simulate what's this product going to look like. And so it's made out of wood. So I'm just going to hit the A for appearance. So the shortcut key is A, and it brings up my appearance. And I can bring this guy down a little bit. Let me expand him open. And we have 2 different kinds of wood materials. One of them says wood solid. And I'm going to go ahead and select the wood solid. And let's do maybe like a finished. And you can see we have a bunch of different kinds. We have cherry, walnut, ash, etc., maple. In fact, I'm going to use maple, so I'm going to do this 3D maple glossy, and you'll notice that some of these are white and some of these are gray, and they have a little download icon, so I can actually download some of the material. So for example, I'm just going to click on this guy here, and it's going to load the maple in. So now I can select which ones of these I want to be maple. I'm just going to drag and drop that onto that particular body, and you'll see that it looks like maple, and it's actually solid all the way through. And so you can kind of see how the grain comes across the top. And we're going to work on the grain here just a little bit. I'll do the same thing there. And then the other stuff I want to do maybe like a walnut. So let me just scroll up here and I'll just do like a 3D walnut. Okay. Like so. So I can kind of now visualize what this is going to look like. Now, if I look at my top view, I can see that it's basically square, but according to the actual cutting board, you can see that the triangles are kind of rotated 45 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we're going to rotate these parts. So I'm going to basically grab this whole block and say move. I'll select rotate. And I can specify an axis if I want to, or I can just, let me just go ahead and select maybe like that as my axis. And I'll start to rotate, and let's just go 45 degrees, like so. And because I've moved this, I'm going to go ahead and capture the position. So it captures that position. And now when I'm looking at the top view, we can see that we're in the correct orientation. Okay. Now, the block I've basically got done, and I need to copy this like 3 or 4 more times. So you might say, well, let's use a pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and click on pattern. And I want to pattern some components. So I'm just going to draw a box around all my components. I'll tell it which direction I want to pattern that in. So I'm going to turn on my origin here. It's kind of hard to see, kind of buried, but I'm going to tell it to go that direction. And I'm not going to worry about the distance right now because I want to show you something. So here I am patterning it. I'll say OK, and that worked out great. If I activate my top level component, we can see that we patterned that. But here's the issue that I kept running into. I'm going to turn off my origin. I only need half of this block. Okay, I want a full block here, a full block here, but I only want half of a block here. So if I were to come in, let's just say create a sketch. Let's look at our top view here. And I'm just going to draw a quick rectangle like so. And I'm going to use this shape to split these blocks. So I'm going to come in here and say split the body. I'll click on this guy. What's the splitting tool? I'll click on this guy and watch what happens. It actually splits these over here also. And I don't want that. Now, why did it do this? Well, it kind of makes sense. It created a pattern. It's basically almost like a mirror, but it's just basically copying this over and over again. So unfortunately, I can't use a pattern in this situation. Okay. So I'm going to undo back. Let's get back to here. So then you might say, okay, well, maybe you could just copy and paste. So I'll right click. I'll just go ahead and select all of these bodies. I'm going to right mouse click and say copy. Now you'll notice up here it says move copy, and this allows you to move it and create a copy of it at the same time. Or I can just say copy right here. So I'll go ahead and say copy. I'm going to activate my top level, and then I'm going to right mouse click, and you'll see it says paste. Okay. So there, I've pasted it. I'm just going to go ahead and move this over. I'll say OK. And let's do the exact same thing again. I'm going to create a sketch on here. Kind of look at it in the top view. And I'll just draw a shape like so and do the split body again. So what's the body of split? We'll say these two guys. What's the splitting tool? I'll say that. And that time it worked. Okay. So you'll notice I was able to copy And then when I changed this, it did not change the other ones. So basically what I'm showing here is sometimes some of the commands you think might work, such as pattern, which is really quick and easy, might cause problems down the road. So we want to make sure that we are using the commands that make sense in some of these cases. So you might have to think ahead a little bit, but I was able to use the copy command and then paste it, okay? Okay, so I'm going to undo. I'm going to back up again. And so here is my block right here. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on this and say copy. And then I'll say paste. So instead of copying the bodies, I copied this component that has all of these in here. Okay. And so now you see it's actually going to create a separate block called block 2. Let's go ahead and do the exact same thing again. So I'm going to create my sketch, look at it kind of from the top, and draw my rectangle. And what I'm showing here is there's a couple different ways to do the same thing. So first time I copied the bodies, and that worked fine. This time I copied the component. So you'll notice that now I have this block 2 component with all of these bodies underneath it. So let's do the split. I'll select my splitting tool. I'll say OK, and notice what happened. It split these guys. Now don't worry, probably half of you guys are freaking out like, well, why did that do that? I'm going to show you a neat trick, and that trick is to use what's called paste new. So when you do a copy and a paste, you're basically saying take this and make an exact copy of it over here, and they're linked together. So if I change one, the other one changes. But if I do a paste new, I'm basically saying create use this, but create like a clone of it, but it's going to be its own separate entity. So we're going to show that. So here I basically copied the block component and then I just pasted it. And we see the problem that we ran into. Okay, so this time, I'm going to undo back. We're back to our block. I'm going to go ahead and say copy. Then I'm going to right mouse click up here, and you'll notice that we have paste, and then we have paste new. So I'm going to say paste new, and you can see it creates another component. I'll move this guy over however far, and we'll worry about dimensions here in just a moment. I'll go ahead and say OK, and now we can see that we have this block with all of the bodies. Okay. I'm going to capture the position, and let's do the sketch again. I'll draw my rectangle. Stop my sketch. And let's do our split body. So I'm going to split these guys. Select that, say OK, and notice what happened. So the solution here is to use paste new. So we created our block, or one block, and then we mirrored it multiple times, added our appearances to it, and then we copied that whole section and paste new over here. And that basically is copying the information, but it's not linking it together. So that paste new is a really cool command. So let me show that one more time. I'm going to come in here and say copy, and then right click again, and you can see it says paste new. I see there's a lot of chat going on. I also have one of my cohorts online answering some of these questions, so I really appreciate all of your positive comments and some of your questions here. So I'm I'm not going to do the whole cutting board, but I'm going to show you how I would go about positioning parts, etc. Kind of using sketches and stuff. So I'm going to undo back to here. So I've got my block, okay? And maybe I'll just create a sketch like so. And I'm going to project some of this geometry. So I'm just going to project this block right here. And I'm going to create just some basic geometry, something like so. And I'm purposely making it so it's not exact. So I'm kind of doing weird angles here. Because what I want to do is get an exact distance. So I'm going to come in here and say, I want these to be parallel. So I want that line and that line to be parallel. You can see that. I'll say that line and that line to be parallel. Then I might say I want the distance between these two to be 1/4 of an inch, 0.25. You can see how it brings the line a little bit closer. I'll do the same thing here. And here's another neat tip. I've shared this a couple times previously, but you'll notice it's asking for a dimension. I can click on an existing dimension and it's going to reference that dimension. So I don't have to type in 0.25. I just have to click on an existing dimension, and you can see how it created a formula for that dimension. So if I were to change this from 0.25 to 0.5, you would see that one would update also. It's a really neat trick. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and say 0.25. And then I want this to come to a point, so I might use the extend command. So I'm just going to extend these lines. And what that does is that gives me a distance here. So I could, if I wanted to, I could convert these to construction lines by selecting them and then hitting the construct icon. And now you can see that these are construction lines. I'll stop my sketch. Okay, so now I basically, the only reason I did that was to create a reference, like how far do I need to separate these blocks? Because if I were to measure between that point there and that point there, you can see that it's not 1/4 of an inch, right? It's 1/4 of an inch in the parallel direction. So I wanted these 2 points so I knew what that distance was. So now I'll copy my block. So I'll come in here and say copy. I'll right click up here and say paste new. And now it's asking how far do I need to move it. Well, I don't want to drag, I want to be very specific. So in my move copy menu, you can see we can do free move, translate, rotate, and then we also have point to point. So I'm going to select point to point, and I want to go from that point there to this far point right here. And you'll see how it created that copy for me, and it went to the exact location that I needed it to go to. Honestly, that point-to-point command I think is underused. I use it a lot. And sometimes I'll do what I just did here, where I'll create a sketch and get exact distances to give me those very specific points. Instead of having to measure and type in 0.354 or whatever, I'm going exactly from point A to point B. And I'm going to go ahead and capture that position. Okay, so now you'll see we've got block, and we've got this new block here also. Okay, so let's do that again. I'm just going to say copy, paste new, and how far? I'm going to go from this point to this point. It'll put it in the exact same location, right? So I need to know what that distance is. So if I do that, it's going to put it right in the exact same spot. So unfortunately, I might have to do this projection again, or I could do a measurement now. So I actually have 2 points. So I could say, let's measure from here to here. And you'll notice it says click to copy to the clipboard. So I could do that. Or, check this out. I'm going to, instead of copying this one, I'm going to copy this guy. So I'm going to undo back. So I still have this one here. I'll right click and say copy. We'll go ahead and paste new. And then what's the distance? Well, I can still use this distance. So I'm going to say from there to there, and you'll see that it actually copied it across. So instead of having to redo my sketch or create another whole sketch or whatever, I just basically copied this section but used the exact same distance over here. And we'll do that one more time. So I'll say copy, paste new. Let me zoom out a little bit. I'll do the point to point. We'll go from that point there to that point there and say OK. Now what's neat about this is these are all separate. I can do changes to any of these and they won't affect the other ones. And that's kind of the important thing here. Okay, I'm going to go back. Let's go ahead and create another sketch here, maybe on this face here. It says some components have been moved. Do you want to capture the current position? Yes, I do. I want to capture this position. And it adds those into my timeline. And I now have all of these parts. And I'm going to do basically the same thing. I want to create an intersection here that I can catch to. So I'm going to project maybe that guy there, create a line somewhere like so. Use my constraints to say I want these to be parallel. Maybe we make that a construction line, and I'll go ahead and extend that point. Now, of course, I need to throw a dimension on here, so let me just throw a quick dimension. Now, I've been typing in 0.25 a lot. I could have probably created a variable called like trim or something like that, because these are the trim pieces. In fact, let me show you on the screen here. So I'm trying to find how wide these little darker walnut pieces are. So I could have created a variable called trim, and if I change the width of that, I could just change it in my variables. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave that 0.25. And I now have a point there. So let's go ahead and grab this first block, copy, and paste new. Just like I did before, I'm going to select point to point. I'm going to grab this top point here and grab that point there, and we can see that I was able to position that. Okay. Now I need to rotate this. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate, and it's asking for an axis. So I want to rotate around the center right here. So I'm just going to kind of hover around, and you can see that it's actually going to select that edge. And I can now rotate my block 90 degrees. And so all of the walnut pieces are going to line up here. Hopefully that makes sense what I did there. So I just rotated around basically the center of this block here. I'll go ahead and capture that position. And here I can use the mirror command. So I could come in here and say create, create mirror. Let's do components. I'm going to go ahead and select all of those components. What's my mirror plane? Now, I have an issue. I don't have a plane where it needs to be. Okay, so you can kind of see my origins sort of floating out here in space. And I want to be very specific. So I need to create a plane that kind of slices through the middle of this. So I have a couple options here. So I could say a plane through two edges. So I could say maybe a plane through this edge here and this edge here, and you can see how it created a plane that's slicing through those two edges. If I get near the plane, I can actually change the size of it, so you can grab these corners and make that plane bigger, so you can kind of see how it's slicing through. But now I have a plane that I could mirror from. So let's go ahead and do that again. I'll say mirror. Let's do the components. Sorry, it was this last block here. What's my mirror plane? That's my mirror plane. I'll say OK, and there we go. Okay. Go ahead and turn off my construction plane so you can kind of see what's going on here. So hopefully what you're seeing here is that, I spent just a little bit of time creating one little block, and we mirrored that a couple times to create a quadrant or 4 blocks. I added my materials, and then I'm able to copy and paste that around, mirror them if I need to. And so I'm not recreating complex sketches or a whole bunch of extrusions. I basically only have one extrusion in this project so far. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is start to kind of shape what this is going to look like. So I'll come in here and create a sketch. We'll kind of look at it from the top. And I'm going to draw a rectangle that basically cuts through all of these shapes right here. Okay, so I'm just going to draw something sort of quick like so. I'll just come over here like that. But I want to be more precise. I want to make these line up with each other, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to have to use some constraints. So let's do horizontal, vertical. Oops, let me try coincident. Coincident. I want that edge and that point, so you can kind of see how it brought that over. I'll do the same thing here. I'll say that edge and that point. If I wanted to, I could be, I've already did it, but I go ahead and click, that edge and that point, and it makes it coincident with that. And then finally, I'll do the same thing here. Okay, so I've basically defined the cutting that I want to do here. So I'll stop my sketch, and we're going to use split body. What's the body to split? Let's start with this guy here and this one over here. And what's the splitting tool? I'll go ahead and select that and say OK. And you'll notice that it only split those blocks. It didn't do any of my copies or any of my mirrors. And again, that's the power of the paste new command. Okay. Now, I'm going to edit this because I could do my split all at once. I'm going to go back and edit. What are the bodies to split? I'll go ahead and add in a couple other ones. Let's do those two and those two. Say OK, and we've now split all of those bodies. I basically want to get rid of all of these. They're on the outside of my rectangle here. So I've got quite a few. Now, if I were to hunt for all of these, so let's do maybe like this guy here. It's under block 2. I'd have to expand this guy open. I'd have to expand open bodies. And there it is. Okay. So here's a neat little trick. Okay. If you just click and hold for about a second, it allows you to probe through. So for example, the first face, then there's a vertex, and then there's another face behind it, for example. But right here, it says Parents. I'm going to go ahead and click on the Parents tab. And this is basically the hierarchy of what was created. So the face was created from an extrude, and then here's the body. And then here's the component. And then here's the top level component. So you can see how you're basically stepping through all the way down to the face creation. So again, let me just go ahead and minimize this, and we're not even going to use the browser over here. I'm just going to click and hold for about a second, go to Parents, and select that body. If I right mouse click, I can say, let's remove this. So I'm going to hit remove, and you can see that it goes away. I didn't delete it, I just said remove it off of the screen. So again, I didn't have to hunt through my browser. I can do this very quickly. I'm just going to click on Parents, grab that body, click on this guy. I'm holding down my control key so I can control my selection. So, okay, this one's because the sketch is turned on, so that's kind of getting in the way. So let me turn that sketch off. I'll click and hold, do the Parents. Now I can get to my body there. Same thing here. So instead of having to go through my browser multiple times and try and find what's the correct name or what's the correct body, I can use this, what I call the probe command, basically just kind of probing through and finding all of these. So there. Then I can just right mouse click and say remove. And we're now to what the cutting board looks like. Okay, then the last thing I would do is probably create those trim pieces. So I'll just create a sketch. And I could use many different commands. I could use the line command. I could do maybe an angled rectangle if I wanted to or something. I'll just come over like this, kind of snap, and come across, come down. Oops. Clicked too fast there, so I'm going to go ahead and close this guy up. I see that it kind of turned tan, so I know that that's a valid profile. Grab that and say extrude. Now when I do this, I might say I want this to be a new component, okay? And how far do I want to go? I could start typing in thickness, but you'll notice it actually remembers stuff that you've used previously. So I'm going to just come in here and pick on thickness. That's going to be a new component. And there it is. In fact, I could come back and rename it. Let's just call it trim. I'll do my appearance. And in this case, I want it to be kind of a different material. So maybe some cherry. So I'll go ahead and drag cherry onto there. And it's going to make that into a 3D cherry wood, so you can kind of see how it's red. And I could do the exact same thing. I would come in and sketch these little sections there. I'm not going to do that just to speed up time. But I could even then mirror all of this across if I wanted to. What I'm going to show next really doesn't have to do with copy and paste, but it kind of gives you a little bit more realism on your parts. So I use that 3D wood command, and what we're going to do is actually switch into the render module and kind of tweak with the wood. So let's take a look at this. So I can see that pretty much all of these, for example, the maple, they all look the same, which isn't bad, but I want to give it more realism like it would look in the real life. I can also see like when the light reflects off of it, like you can see over here, there's some light reflecting off some pores and some grooves and stuff. And we can actually change what that looks like in the render section here. So I'm going to switch over to render. And what this is going to do is allow me to kind of change. Let me add some light in here really quick. I apologize. Let's do maybe like photo booth. Okay. So let's take a look at these end triangular pieces, and you can see the end grain right there. Well, if I come in here to texture map controls, this allows you to control what the grain looks like. So for example, I could, and you can kind of see the stuff here. I'm going to grab this arrow, and you can see I could move the grain up a little bit. So now it doesn't look exactly the same as this piece over here. I could also move the grain over a little bit. So now we're kind of doing like quarter sawn, for example. You could even rotate. So let me put this back a little bit, bring it down. So you could rotate what the, the direction of the grain. So kind of more at an angle or something like that. Okay. So I could do that on a couple different pieces here. So I could say maybe like this guy and this guy. I want to pick an axis or whatever. You could change the direction that the wood grain goes if you want to. Or you can do them individually, which is what I would do in this case. So, I could grab this one here and I might just slide that over slightly. And do the same thing on a couple different ones of these. Just slide that over, maybe rotate it ever so slightly just to be a little bit different or something like that. And it just adds a little bit more realism to your finished product. Okay. Let me jump back here. Actually, let me load the finished one. Oh, there we go. Okay. So here's, basically I did what I just showed you. Created these blocks. You can see how I mirrored them. And then just came in and added the trim. And like I mentioned before, I could come in and change my parameters for, the thickness. So instead of 0.75, I want that to be 1 inch, for example. And it just thickened all of the parts to 1 inch. Okay. Let me undo. So, the other thing I was going to say, you can add stuff in here. So, for example, I threw a table, a granite countertop, and I threw a knife on there, added some texture to the knife, etc., and to create some realistic looking renders. And I don't know if you saw the render at the intro here, but you can create some nice looking renders using Fusion 360. So let me just go ahead and bring one of these up. And there you can kind of see the shiny wood grain, etc. So and you can kind of see how I rotated some of these around just to give it a little bit more realism. Okay, so hopefully you learned some tips and tricks with using the copy and the paste command, and more specifically the paste new. I use paste new almost all the time. Now, how do you know which one to use? Well, if you're wanting to copy and paste something and you want them both to change, just use copy and paste. But if you're wanting to take something that you've created and use it somewhere else, but you don't want it to change, that's when you use paste new. So again, hopefully you found this useful. Hope to see you on a future live stream, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.